Good afternoon. I can see everyone's just coming through, so I'm just going to make a slow start with housekeeping and introductions, just so while everyone transfers in from the lobby. For those of you that come to our sessions regularly, you'll probably know who I am, but for those that maybe this is one of your first, I'm Manveen. I'm the Learning and Insights Manager here at the MGAA, and delighted to welcome you to our professional optics session with Empower Development on quality career conversations with your manager and a guide on how to do this. Before I introduce and hand over to Antonia for this session, just a few quick housekeeping points. Nothing too drastic for you, but you'll probably notice that your camera and microphone aren't working or aren't enabled at the moment. It's by design, please don't panic. It's just so that we're maximising bandwidth and reducing disruption throughout the session, so you can get the most out of your time. But we can enable these and will enable these during the Q&A so that you can speak directly and engage in that way and collaborate with us. We do encourage questions and they're very much welcome. You can use the chat or Q&A function. Where possible, we'll cover them through the session, but we will have time at the end for a main Q&A. You'll notice that the session's being recorded and a link to the recording will be issued post-event together with our feedback survey. We do ask if you can spare a few minutes just to share your feedback in that survey link, and I'll also drop it in the chat at the end of the session today, just to ensure that we continue putting the right content and making sure it's of value to our members. We also remind you that if you feel that this is going to support your own learning and development, you may want to include it on your own CPD log. So just a reminder that you can include it and chart your progression. That's all from me. It leaves me to introduce today's session, a guide to quality career conversations with your manager with Empower Development. I'm going to hand over to Antonia now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Manveen. I can see we're already at 23. I'm sure we're going to be joined by a few more people as we go through. Just to introduce myself then, my name is Antonia Roberts. I am Head of Training at Empower Development. Empower Development is an insurance-specific training consultancy. So we do quite a lot in the leadership and management space. In fact, we're talking today about career conversations with your manager. I also do this session from the other perspective. So thinking about, for those of you maybe who are managers, how do you navigate and have those conversations effectively with your team members. So we do quite a lot in the leadership and management. We do quite a lot of what we call soft skills. I know sometimes we talk about soft skills and hard skills. Soft skills, even though sometimes these are the trickier things for us to get our heads around, and actually the more we progress in our careers, it's often these soft skills that become the differentiators, things such as influencing skills, presentation skills, negotiation, project management, all of those sorts of skills that are maybe slightly less tangible. And as an organisation as well, we do some insurance technical. So I personally help people with a more introductory level. I've got some very bright colleagues who focus on the more insurance technical space. But everything that Empower Development does is designed for, tailored to the insurance industry. It's the only industry that we work with. For me personally, I've been working in learning, development, coaching for longer than I care to admit, approaching 15 years, including industry roles in insurance, in the legal industry, and also time spent in consulting, working with industries including insurance. And throughout that time, I have been a manager and am still a manager. So in terms of navigating these conversations, it's something I have a lot of experience of. But also as a coach, working with people at all levels, actually from people who are really at the start of their careers right up to people who are at that higher level looking to get to a top level. At each point of our career transitions, really effective, useful career conversations are really important. They're really critical. So I've kind of distilled some of the key elements, key bits of advice, top tips into today's session. This is part of a much broader session that we do run for people. So I've done my best to condense probably about a day's worth of content into the next 45 minutes. So there's this much to say. We're going to be covering about this much of it, but hopefully I've picked the right bits which are going to be useful for you. So I'm going to be speaking for roughly the next 40 minutes or so. We do have time for Q&A at the end. Please do use that time. Drop your questions into the chat if you're happy for everyone to see them. Otherwise, if you want a bit more of a confidential question, drop it into the Q&A function and we'll come at those towards the end of our time together today. So in terms of our agenda, here's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be thinking about how do we manage our career. Now, actually, when we're talking about career conversations, that really goes hand in hand with active career management. So we're going to speak a little bit about that. We're going to cover the principles of effective career conversations. So we're going to go through really some of that best practice, those key tips and tricks, things for us to be aware of, to think about beforehand, and how we can set those career conversations up to give us what we need in terms of that support. And we're also going to be thinking about the power of language. So not just what the structure of the conversation is, but on a more micro level, what are some of the small things I can do, those tiny little adjustments, and to ensure that actually it's not the message that I want to give or the conversation that I want to have. It's kind of landing the way I intended with my manager. So to begin with then, let's have a little think about the principles of career management. Now, when I talk to people about active career management and sort of how do we drive our careers forward, there is a particular analogy that I really like to use, and that is the analogy of a car. So we need to make sure actually in terms of my career, am I in the driving seat or am I in the passenger seat? Now, what we'll generally find in the first couple of years of our career is that we are very much in the passenger seat. Like my first job, I can't even spell the word insurance. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm kind of relying on my manager to navigate those first initial steps for me, to help me with, oh, you should be doing this. This would be good for your career. You should be having this experience. I'm going to volunteer you for this project. And we are very much in that passenger seat. We're kind of letting somebody else make some of those decisions for us. But for all of us, we reach a point where we have to move from that passenger seat into the driving seat. We need to start making active decisions about the things that we're going to be doing, about our careers, about where we want to go, and it needs to be active rather than passive. And for different people, this comes at different stages, but there always has to be this transition. And I say there has to be. Part of my practice as a coach, I've absolutely worked with people who have ended up, actually quite senior in their careers, but they've been passengers. And they've sort of let somebody else direct their career. There's always been somebody going, you should go for this promotion, you should go for this role, I'd like you to go onto this project. And you can kind of get to a certain point with that. But I've spoken to people who've kind of got to a certain point and they're thinking, well, I've got quite senior, but I don't really want to be here. I sort of want to be over there. And at that point, you start trying to work out, well, how do I unpick this? How do I translate this to this? Because they've sort of been sleepwalking in this direction without really reflecting and thinking, well, actually, is this where I want to be? So not for a second am I saying that when somebody tells us that this would be good for you to do, we should say no. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is we just need to be active in those decisions. We need to think, well, actually, is this something, this is an opportunity that I'm being offered? Is this something that I want to do? Or actually, is this somebody else's opportunity? So again, going back to our analogy, it's about not being in the same car, letting somebody else drive the car that we're in. It's about getting in our own car, and actually we might be in the car directly behind this person, and that's fine. Do you know what? Actually, I'm working with a brilliant manager, mentor. They are going in a certain direction. I'm kind of going along with them, but actually ultimately at all points this is my decision. I'm not a passenger, I'm a driver making these decisions actively. So my first question to you when you're thinking about yourself in your career is actually, am I in the driving seat? Am I making those active decisions on a regular basis in terms of the things that I'm doing and not doing? Or actually, up until this point, have I been a little bit in the passenger seat? And is this career conversation something that's designed to help me kind of move across? Because when we're talking about career conversations, it is not about delegating your career management to your manager. I'm not saying I'm having a career conversation with you so that you can tell me what I should be doing. That isn't the essence of a quality career conversation. What we're actually doing is we are recruiting the people around us to help us to achieve our career ambitions and our career goals. Now, we've badged this course having a career conversation with your manager. And of course, your manager is absolutely somebody you should be having this conversation with. But actually, what you might find is you're not limited to having this conversation with your manager. If I'm speaking to people about my aspirations, about the things I want to achieve, getting feedback, I might not just be having that conversation with my manager, I might be having that conversation with my mentor and with other senior people in the team. Actually, when we're thinking about a good quality career conversation, it's not just, and actually I'd say in some cases better if it isn't, just with one person. So in order to do this then, in order to move from the passenger seat to the driving seat, in order to recruit people to help us with our career ambitions and our career goals, we actually need to have a bit of a direction. We need to know where we're going, because actually if I'm in the driving seat but I don't have a destination, that's not really going to make a difference. I'm not going to be able to have, I'm not going to be able to ask somebody for directions because actually I can't tell them where I'm going. So we're going to do a little bit of a sidestep for a second, because absolutely there's going to be somebody on this call thinking, I want to have a good career conversation. and I don't really know what that next career step looks like for me. So if that's you, don't worry. What we're going to do now is just think a little bit about career goals. So as I said, when it comes to having a career conversation, the career conversation is about recruiting the people around you to help you with your ambitions. We need to define those for ourselves. So I'm going to give you 5 questions, which are going to help you to refine that a little bit for yourself. Now, I'm going to give you these 5 questions. We are on a tight schedule today, so I'm not necessarily going to be able to give you the time to reflect on all of those. But as I go through them, feel free to take your own notes, feel free to take a quick screen grab and to take these away and reflect on them for yourself. So the first thing to do is we need to pick a time horizon. Now, for those of you in the first beginning stages of your careers, for you actually thinking 5 years in advance may be unhelpful. Actually, that's so far away that's too far away for me to come up with something meaningful. So you might pick 12 months. Actually, I'm going to think 12 months ahead. There's going to be some other people a little bit more advanced, and actually it's much more helpful for you to think 5 years in advance. Whatever the time horizon is, there's no right or wrong. Pick one. Do you want to think 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever works for you? Once you have that, the first question we want to ask ourselves is, okay, in that period, how old am I going to be? And I find this is a useful question because it just concentrates the mind a little bit when we're thinking about who we are going to be at that point in the future, whether that's 12 months or whether that is 3 years, 5 years. Next question we have, what do I want to be doing during my work time? Now, for some of you, that's going to be a very easy question to answer. You know exactly what that job title is. You can see maybe even somebody in that role that you'd like to be in. And that's a very simple vision for you. You have that. But there's going to be some people on this call who don't really have a clear answer to that. I don't have that job title. I don't know actually what that role looks like. We all know there are roles now in this industry that didn't even exist 3 years ago. So, again, sometimes, and I'd say this is getting less tangible. But what do I want to be doing in my work time? So for those of you who haven't got a specific job title in mind, that's fine. Just think, actually, what do I want to be doing a little bit more of? Is there anything I want to be doing a little bit less of? So let's say I'm thinking 3 years in advance. Do I want to be doing more client-facing work? Do I want to be doing less client-facing work? Are there some elements of admin that I'm hoping by 3 years' time I will have moved away from? Are there particular elements of my role? Maybe I want to be doing more technical work. Maybe I want to be doing more external market-facing work. Whatever that thing might look like, we just want to think, okay, well, in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, whatever that time horizon is, what do I want to be doing more of? Is there anything I'd like to be doing less of in terms of my work role? So just useful to think about that. Next question, equally as important, what do I want to be doing in my non-working time? Now, it's important for us to think about what we're doing at work, of course, but actually we are more than just the jobs that we do. I know I am. So it's useful to think, okay, well, what does my life outside work look like? Where do I want to be living? What country do I want to be living in? What part of the country do I want to be living in? Who do I want to be living with? What do I want that living situation to look like? How big a house do I want? Where do I want that to be? What hobbies do I want to be pursuing? Do I want to be picking up another language? Do I still want to be studying, or am I hoping that's going to have been finished by that point? What do I want those things outside of my life to be looking like? And as I said, these things are just as important. And it's important here to say, for some people, when it comes to career progression, for me, that the career is the goal. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. That is the ambition. For some people, the career is not the goal. The life outside work is the goal. I want to be able to take 5 foreign holidays a year. I want to be able to pursue all the hobbies that interest me. I want to be able to do all of these things. And actually for that, I need a certain amount of financial resources. And actually that becomes the driver of the career. Because actually in order to have all of those things, I need to be operating at this level here, which means X for my career. Now, there's no right or wrong, and for some of you, it's going to be a bit of a balance. That's fine. Now, if it is, well, actually, I'm only interested in my career and what it can buy me outside work, I might not choose to share that with my manager in quite those words. But it is really important that we understand what that looks like for us and what that balance looks like for us. Now, again, there's no right or wrong. I know equally successful people, some people who work furiously and do amazingly for the joy and the reward that they get from their career. I know people who work brilliantly and achieve amazing things because actually their role gives them the opportunity to pursue the things that are important to them outside work. There's no right or wrong, but we do need to understand and be honest with ourselves in terms of what that driver is, because it becomes our powerful why. When it comes to pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone, and actually for some of you, even having a career conversation might be outside of your comfort zone, when we're asking ourselves the question, why should I bother? Which is a good question to ask ourselves. We need to have a good answer. And actually your answer is going to be aligned to the answers that you have to questions 2 and 3, and we're going to come on to 4 and 5. So it's just useful for us to understand this as our powerful why. Then we have 2 more questions. Firstly, what do I want to keep unchanged in my life in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, whatever you choose? And then what do I want to be different? Now, I've done a lot of coaching with people over the years, and people's heads tend to skip straight to question 5. I think that's fair to say. And people think, oh, here's all the things that I wish were different in my work life, my professional life, my career, my network. People think really very much about all the things they wish were different. My very strong advice is always to start with the things that we want to keep the same. What are your non-negotiables? And it's really important to have those set so that actually any opportunities that come our way, we can have a look at them through this lens. Actually, if it's, I'm not going to give up on, let's say I have a work-life balance. That's so important to me. Even when I see myself in 5 years' time, I see myself maintaining this work-life balance. That's important for me to know. If I'm in a client-facing role and in 5 years' time, I still see myself in a client-facing role, great. That is something that I want to keep unchanged. So it's always useful to start from what things am I not willing to give up before we start moving on to what would I like to see different? Because as well, we have to be honest with ourselves. Sometimes there are payoffs. Okay, so it's important for us to have this. If we have a strong vision as to where we want to be, that's when we can start having good career conversations with people to recruit them to help us to achieve it. Now, there's going to be somebody on this call right now thinking, Antonia, yes, that's all well and good, but if you'd asked me where I wanted to be 3 years ago, I would not be describing my life as it is now, and actually I'm quite happy. And you'd be right to ask that question. That is a useful challenge. What I would say is with that, it's always useful to be aiming for something. Now, actually, let's say I've been working towards being I'm going to say, I'm an assistant cyber underwriter. I want to be a cyber underwriter, and I've been working in that direction. And actually, I've been making decisions, and this is where it's useful to have a goal. I know where I want to be, and every opportunity that crosses my desk, I ask myself, is this going to help me get there? And if the answer is yes, it goes into the maybe pile. If the answer is no, it goes into this is probably somebody else's opportunity pile. And then actually, overnight, something changes. And I go, and actually, do you know what? Cyber isn't really for me anymore. I'm going to broaden things. I'm going to go financial lines. And then actually, maybe all the questions I ask myself, they change. Actually, instead of, is it going to get me over here? I say, is it going to get me over there? Just as important. So it doesn't matter if our goals change. They can. There is flexibility in this. We are not carving anything into stone, but it's always useful to be working intentionally. Because if I don't know where I'm aiming for, then actually when those opportunities cross my desk, I don't know which ones are good for me and which ones aren't. So I risk either saying yes to everything and ending up burning myself out and not really getting anywhere. Or just as bad, I end up not saying yes to anything because I haven't got that powerful why. I don't have that reason why I should be jumping into to pick up those opportunities. So before we can have a career conversation, we first need to understand what is it that we're looking to achieve. Right? We need to be in that driving seat. Now, the next thing we have to acknowledge when it comes to these career conversations and when it comes to taking active control of our career is the fact that there sometimes needs to be a little bit of change and a bit of discomfort with that. Now, I quite like this quotation attributed to Henry Ford. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you'll always gotten. That's not brilliant gotten, but you understand the concept. If I, as of tomorrow, continue doing everything that I did today and everything I've done for the last 5 years, I cannot expect that in 5 years' time, I will be somewhere else than where I am right now. So when it comes to having career conversations, when it comes to taking active control of our careers, we also need to accept that this will involve doing something a little bit differently. It will involve pushing ourselves a little bit outside of our comfort zone, because actually, if there doesn't exist a situation where I do everything exactly the same and I end up somewhere else. Right, so we also need to remember that with career progression, and I'm not just talking about promotion, but just progression, moving laterally, moving sideways, moving diagonally. With all of these things come the expectation that we're going to have to do things a little bit differently. Okay, and with all of those things, let's say I've decided that I want to be either vertically or horizontally. I'm thinking about myself in a few years' time, and I'm seeing that there's somewhere that I want to be. With that, the good news and the bad news, right? The good news is the number one person who can influence that is you. The bad news is the number one person who can influence that is you. Again, from a driving seat perspective, there's no one else who's going to do this for you. It's all on you. And with that, there'll be things which are in your control. There'll be things that you are in your gift. I can say, yes, I'm going to take that opportunity that you have offered me. It's in my gift to say yes or no. There's going to be things which are not in my gift. Actually, I can't control which opportunities are offered to me, but maybe I can influence them. There's some things that I can influence in terms of the people around me. I'm not in control of them. I can't tell them what to do, and particularly if I'm at the junior end of the scale, but I certainly can influence that. And there will be things I have no control over whatsoever. For example, global pandemics, right? Now, actually, in my career, the secret, and this is really easy to say, and I appreciate it's difficult to do, is I need to not waste my time and energy on the things I can't control. Instead, I need to focus on what I can control, and as importantly, especially when we're thinking about career conversations, what I can influence. Now, if I've decided that there is a particular experience that I want to have, right? There's a particular role that I want. How am I going to get that experience? How am I going to get that exposure? I'm not in charge of those opportunities that are given to me. If I were to ask you, how do I get that? You're going to give me the very obvious answer, which is, well, you just ask. And that sounds so basic, doesn't it? Just if there's work that you want to do, just ask for it. And yet you'd be surprised how many people think, oh no, I can't. No, my manager or the people above me, they are allocating work on a strategic basis. They are making decisions as to who gets what bit of work and based on their superior knowledge of the organization, the market, and me. So I'm going to put that to a test. I have a question for you. So this is something we're going to be doing in the chat function. So if you haven't already got the chat function, put your sandwich down, just pick up your keyboard. And I have a scenario for you. Here is a scenario. You are managing two interns. They are identical in every single way. Let's call them identical twins, right? There's no way in which these two are different. They're both very high performing. They are called Sam and they are called Ali, two lovely androgynous names. So Ali comes to you and says, oh, really enjoying my role, really learning a lot. If there's ever an opportunity for me to sit in on one of your client meetings, I'd love to have that opportunity just to see how those operate. Sam says nothing. A couple of weeks later, you need someone to sit in on one of those meetings and take some notes. So now this is your opportunity in the chat. Who are we asking to come along to that meeting? Are we asking Ali or are we asking Sam? Yep. Got some answers flooding in. Yeah, absolutely. It's an absolute no-brainer, isn't it? Right. So Sarah, absolutely. I would mention it. But I'll probably mention it to both. Now, I'm going to make 2 points here. Firstly, for those of you who are managers, we need to step back and reflect on just because one person has mentioned their interest and the other person hasn't. Sam could be just as ambitious, just as interested, more so, in fact, but we just don't see that and we don't know. So actually, as a manager, this is why it's really important for us to have career conversations, because what I'd like to think is that I'd have sat down with Ali and I'd have sat down with Sam one-on-one and said, what are you looking to get out of this experience? What are your career ambitions? What do you want from this role? And then I would know from that, okay, great, I've got some opportunities and I can allocate them based on their interest levels. Okay, that's what you get as a proactive manager. Now, there'll be times in your career where you have a proactive manager who is doing a lot of that for you. Fantastic. Right? That's a time when maybe you can be a little bit more passenger seat and you can maybe get away with it. But far better is to be driving seat. And actually, irrespective of whether or not somebody is actively working for you, asking these questions, I kind of need to be Ali in this situation. I need to step up and say to my manager, if you ever get an opportunity, I'd love to do it. Because you're absolutely right. Most of you who have written Ali, as a manager, if I have an opportunity and I have two people and I've got somebody who's actively asked for that opportunity and I have somebody else for whom they might not even want to do it, it's a no-brainer. I know that I'm adding value by giving this task to Ali. And actually, for Sam, this might be something they don't want to do. And so I might be giving them something they actively don't want to do, would dislike doing. So we can see how it becomes a little bit of a no-brainer. Actually, here, I kind of need to be a little bit more Ali. I need to volunteer this information to recruit the people around me to identify those opportunities that are going to help me. Now, absolutely, for those of you who are managers, this is why we need to have career conversations from the other side. But actually, if we're going to be driving seat rather than passenger seat, we need to provide this information. We need to actively volunteer it. Because actually, most of the people most people in our industry, most people in the world are good people. If I have an opportunity to give somebody an opportunity that costs nothing to me, that's something that they've asked for, 99.9% of people are going to give that thing to that person. Of course they are. So what we need to do is just make sure that people know enough to identify those opportunities which are going to be valuable for us. And this is where we get on to having good quality career conversations. A good quality career conversation, as I keep saying, recruits the people around us to help us with our career goals. So now we fall into the meat of the topic of the presentation, which is, okay, great. I need to have a career conversation because my boss needs to know, I need to be Ali, right? My boss needs to know what my ambitions are so that they can make the right opportunities available to me. How do I do it? Right. We have our first step, which is to have a plan, not a script, and to give our managers a bit of a heads up. So why do we have a plan and not a script? Well, we want to have a plan so that we know what we're going to say, right? We've got a couple of words jotted down. We know roughly those things that we want to say. But we know also instinctively that a script is a bad idea. This is a conversation, right? It's not a speech. If I have a script written out word for word, I might be able to say it perfectly, but I'm going to lose all connection. And as soon as I'm asked the question, which is a little bit off script, there's realistically I might struggle. I'm also, although I might write everything perfectly, we know we don't write the way we speak. So I'm not going to be able to communicate it authentically, sincerely, because I'm just going to be reading words off a page. So ditch the scripts, but have a plan, have some bullet points. Next thing, we do need to give our managers a bit of a heads up. We do need to let them know it's coming. I can't just tack some big career questions onto the end of our operational one-to-one because they might just not be ready for it. So you have the perfect excuse. I have just attended an MGAA webinar on having career conversations. It would be great if we could have a chat, right? You can feel free to use me in this session as a bit of an excuse to have that conversation. But it's useful just to give them a little bit of time to prepare, just because we know what it's like actually. And I've been a manager, you know, if you think you're busy, your manager's going to be just as busy as you are. And actually you want to have the best of them in that meeting. And actually they might want to spend a little bit of time sitting back, thinking about you, thinking about useful feedback or advice, or what is it that they can give you that's going to be valuable, what opportunities there might be available. Right, so you want to give them a little bit of time to prepare. Okay, next up, know what you're asking for. Again, I can't just go into that meeting and say, I'm ambitious, what should I do? Because that's not kind of giving my manager any direction, right? What is it that you're asking for? Do you want opportunities? Is there something specifically that you want exposure to? Do you want mentorship? Are you asking them to help you make a decision? Are you looking for advice? Do you need them to give you some tips on what, or is that the question? Actually, I want to be in this position. What is it that I need to be doing? What is it that I need to be focusing on? We need to make sure that we're being specific, right? This is driving seat. It's not enough to say, what do you think I should do? We're giving over far too much agency in that scenario. So be as specific as you can. What you might actually be asking for is mentorship, but not from them. Maybe you want to be, is there anybody else who they would recommend that would be good for you to speak to get a different perspective on your development and your career? Is it network, right? So just know what you're asking for. Next up, be commercial. And especially if those of you who are interested in asking for promotion, this is probably the single most important thing that you need to bear in mind. I need to be commercial. I need to understand where my role fits into the commercial model of the team I'm in or the line of business I'm in. And those of you who aren't client facing, your roles are still commercial. I worked in the training team and my role was still commercial. All of us are involved. There's a red thread between the financial success or commercial success of the organization and what we do day to day. And we just need to understand what that red thread looks like. If I give you the analogy of an assistant underwriter wanting to progress to underwriting, but in a line of business that's shrinking, where you kind of say, well, that's not commercial. There isn't a role there. There isn't going to be, unless somebody were to leave that team, to leave a space, there isn't necessarily space to accommodate what would need to be required to bring in another underwriter into that team. So when it comes to where we want to be thinking about our positions, we have to be commercial. We have to understand actually, is there space for this opportunity, this thing that I want to do? And when it comes to this, what I'll often say is there's two sides to it. We have the business case and we have the personal case. The business case is there a financial driver for this opportunity that I'm looking to move into? And that actually doesn't necessarily mean a promotion. It could be a sidestep. I had a great conversation with somebody who basically carved out their own role in IT sustainability a few years ago. They saw a job spec for somebody doing that same role in another organization and said, we haven't got that role. I'd be quite interested in that role. And so what they did is they set it up for themselves. And they put a business case together for them moving into this kind of work, and they essentially created their own role within the organization. So number one, we need to have a business case. We need to understand that there is space for what we want to do in the organizations and teams that we're in. The second thing we need is a personal case, because what I don't want to do is to persuade my boss that absolutely we need somebody doing this particular role, and for them to say, great, thank you very much, Antonia, let's hire externally. So also, I need to be able to articulate very clearly why I'm the right person to make the most of that commercial opportunity that I've identified. So remember, when we're talking about these decisions, they're made on a commercial basis. Is there a financial driver? Is there a commercial driver for this opportunity? And then secondly, there needs to be that personal case. Why am I the right person now to move into whatever that thing looks like? So if you're looking for promotion, for progression, we just need to remember we all work in commercial organizations. We need to think about where do we sit and where does what we are looking for sit in that bracket. Next up, we need to understand what's important to our manager. What does success look like for them? Actually, if I am currently in my manager's eyes underperforming, they are potentially not likely to entertain a conversation with me around the additional stuff I could add to the team until I've got the basics right. So we just need to understand again, like what maybe there's a difference between what I think success looks like, what my manager thinks success looks like. I just need to make sure that we are on the same page, right? Again, if I'm asking for all of this extra stuff, I need to make sure that actually in terms of what my manager thinks is important, these things are aligned and I'm seeing as delivering for them, what is important for them. Often when we're talking about support, career support, it's kind of reciprocal, right? I'm helping people out around me and they're helping me out in return. I cannot expect to be underperforming, not doing the basic levels of my job, and then to be able to ask my manager to go out of their way to give me additional opportunities when actually I'm not doing those core elements myself. So we just need to understand what's important to my manager here, the things that I'm asking for, where do they align with, and what's important to that person. Again, our managers often are not the owner of our careers, but often a very important stakeholder and occasionally a gatekeeper. And then lastly, we need to be brave. What's the worst that could happen? Let's say I go to my manager and I say, I would like to be a senior manager in 3 years. And they say, no, absolutely not. Antonia, no chance. Bit gutted, but that's actually quite good news for me. And it's quite good news for me for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it allows me to ask the question, okay, why not? What is it you need to see from me to see me in that way, right? It also gives me the opportunity to say what's going on in the team. And so we can have a bit of a conversation, because it might be that, the example I gave earlier, we're in a line of business which is shrinking. Maybe actually there's going to be nothing. Maybe that we are in a particular situation where there's not going to be a team here in the next couple of years, in which point I need to start making different decisions in terms of my career and where I'm going to specialize. Maybe actually that gives me the opportunity to say, okay, well, you're not seeing me in this way. I can change the way I'm operating. I can start stepping up a little bit. Maybe my manager didn't think I was very ambitious, so they've set the bar quite low. Maybe actually I need them to raise the bar a little bit so I can prove myself. It just enables that conversation. So really what I'm saying here is there isn't any bad outcome to having these conversations. There's only really positive outcomes, even if it isn't what feels like instinctively good news. It's still actually useful information for you to have in that moment. Now, when I speak to people about careers and career management and career conversations, often people are a little bit worried about this financial element, the opportunities available to them. We are in a shifting market, and we know that in market cycles can move quite slowly, but actually sometimes relatively quick. And what that means for knock-on opportunities or the rest of it. And so the example, if that's you thinking, well, actually, how do I make the perfect decision? How do I make sure that I'm always perfectly aligned when it comes to what I'm going to be doing next? I'm going to say two things. Firstly, and this is not a quotation, I can take zero credit for this whatsoever, but I love it, which is every successful career story is a post-rationalization of random events, which is to say, when it sounds like somebody's made the perfect career move at every single stage of their career, it's easy to do that when you're looking back. The fact is, in the moment, they didn't know they were making the perfect career move. So take the pressure off yourself. And the second thing is we need to be flexible. We need to be willing to move. And the example I always use for this is cyber. I know people working in cyber insurance who have been in the market for 30 years. They haven't been working in cyber for 30 years. They were working in other lines of business and they've moved into it. So again, we might think from a sort of mid-career level, we've invested so much in one particular line of business, or even looking outside of that sort of technical side, investing in a set of a deep knowledge of a particular area. We can almost kind of feel a bit trapped by that expertise that we've developed. What I'm going to say to you now is don't be. There are lots of opportunities, and actually it's very important in our market to be flexible, to be able to explore and open up those opportunities, to think about what else there is out there that you could move into. So it's great that we have our expertise, but make sure that that is something that enables you, and you don't kind of build those walls around you and with that expertise. And if you need that motivation to do it, just think about all the people, the senior people who are in cyber, who definitely weren't there 20 years ago. And then lastly, what I'm going to do is just give you some magic words. Now, often in training courses, we say there are no magic words. I can't just give people magic words which are going to fix everything, because everyone's a little bit different. This is about as close as you can get to magic words. And those magic words are, I'm working with the objective of this in this time frame. I'm working with the goal of being an underwriter in the next 2 years. I'm working with the goal of being a senior manager in the next 3 years. And the reason these are magic words, sometimes we feel a bit awkward expressing our ambition because we don't want to seem ungrateful, we don't want to seem pushy, we don't want to seem arrogant or over ambitious. But actually, if I tell you what I'm trying to achieve and I give you a timeline, I'm not saying I'm ready now. I'm not saying I want your job today. I'm saying that I'm working with this goal in this time frame. And when we have this conversation, it becomes a little bit easier. I know plenty of people who don't want to say to their manager that they want to leave the team because they're worried that their manager is going to be concerned about their commitment. But actually, if I've been working in a role for a number of years and I'm saying in 3 years' time I'm looking to be doing something different, that doesn't affect my commitment right now. So again, it's just a way of kind of framing our ambitions in a way, putting a timeline on them, allows us to speak about it, and then allows our manager to almost contextualize that without it really impacting on what we're doing right now. And at the same time, if I say this to my manager, they might say, okay, great, well, that means you probably need to start looking at this. You probably need to do these qualifications. We probably need to be setting you up with that. And so it kind of gives them as well that time frame to help offer you the support you're going to need. And just to say, I have given this advice to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people over the years. Nobody has ever come back to me and said, Antonia, I was fired. What tends to come back is people saying, oh, actually, I had this conversation with my manager. I said 5 years. They came back and said, you could probably do it in 3. Right, that's probably more likely to be where we are. Now, the big caveat here, of course, is that you know your manager better than I do. You tailor this advice, you tailor these words, you tailor all of this to meet that relationship that you have with that person. Okay, so for the last bit, before we open up a Q&A, we're just going to talk a little bit about language. So how can we, in these career conversations, where we know sometimes we might be feeling a bit nervous, we might be like working ourselves up to it. Actually, for those of you with younger, not younger, but more junior, less experienced managers, your manager might be a little bit nervous about it as well. They haven't had this kind of conversation with someone before and they're really keen to get it right. So I've just got 4 little pieces of advice when it comes to the language you use in those meetings. So number 1, we aren't going to use the word but. We're going to replace that word with and. If I say to my manager, I'm really enjoying my role in the team, but the problem with the word but, I'm really enjoying my role in the team, but I'm looking for something else. Everything that comes before the word but means nothing. And we all instinctively know that. If I say, oh, I really like your jumper, but you know that I don't really like your jumper. If you say, Antonia, I really like your haircut, but I know you're about to say something horrible about my haircut. So we're not going to use the word but, we're going to use the word and. I'm really enjoying my time in the team, and I think I'm ready for more of a challenge. I'm really enjoying my time. The other thing you can use instead of and is at the same time. At the same time, I'm ready for some more stretch. So instead of but, which kind of means the first section of the sentence means nothing, so we'll focus on the second. Let's use and or at the same time, which give both halves of the sentence equal weighting. I really like your jumper. At the same time, I like the jumper you were wearing last week. Actually, at that point, I like both of your jumpers. It's not a one or the other situation. Okay, so ditch but, use and or at the same time. The next thing we are not going to do is we are not going to sit across a table from our manager. We are going to sit either next to them or we're going to sit around the corner of a table. And when it comes to sort of subtle body language, we all know that if we're sitting kind of like an interview, opposite sides of a table, it almost feels a bit, us and them. It feels like you're separated by a lump of furniture. It almost feels a bit combative. And so if you kind of put yourself at opposite sides of a table, sitting, looking directly opposite each other, sometimes that doesn't give the setting for a really conducive, collaborative conversation, right? You're kind of putting ourselves on opposite sides of this issue. Actually, far better is to sit next to each other or around the corner. Actually, for those of you involved in negotiation, the same thing goes. Good piece of advice. We always sit next to or around the corner. We don't sit opposite. It just kind of sets the tone for a more collaborative conversation. It's part of the reason why, for those of you who can picture Lloyd's in your head, if you think about the box, it's not the brokers sitting opposite the underwriters, right? Everyone sits around the corner. Okay, so we're going to sit around the corner, not opposite, so we're having a more collaborative conversation. My next piece of advice is around feedback. Now, some people perfectly comfortable giving feedback, perfectly comfortable asking for feedback. There's going to be somebody on this call who gets loads of feedback from their manager and it's all really helpful. Brilliant. We also know there's going to be a couple of people on this call who maybe don't get very much feedback, or wish they got more feedback or more helpful feedback. If that's you, my top piece of advice is actually not to ask for more feedback, but it's to change your language. And instead of asking for feedback, ask for advice. Now, that word feedback sometimes can feel a bit formal. It can feel a bit structured. It feels almost quite heavy. Can I have some feedback? Oh God, right, okay, let's sit down and do this thing. But if I say, oh, could I have some advice? Everyone loves giving advice. So if we just actually, and what you'll get is probably the same sort of thing. But if we just spin around that tiny little word, asking for feedback to asking for advice, actually that can really change the tone of the conversations that we're having. Now, particularly as well, if you're working with somebody who isn't your line manager, maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's somebody who's at the same level as your manager who you're working with on a project and you'd really like to get some feedback from them. Sometimes you might think, oh, it might be a bit awkward for me to ask them for feedback. There's nothing stopping you saying, oh, it's been really interesting working together. I'd be really keen to get some advice for you on, we've been working together for a while. Is there anything I could be doing more of or could be doing less of to be more effective? I'm really ambitious. I'm really keen to progress. Have you got any advice for me? Actually, all of a sudden, people might be willing to give us a little bit more than if we'd said, keen to progress, can you give me some feedback? Actually, that word carries a little bit of weight. So we're just going to ditch the word feedback. We're going to replace it with the word advice. And lastly, we're going to work on our poker face. Now, if we go back to our previous scenario, let's say I've said I want to be a senior manager in 3 years, and my manager goes, no, not really, Antonia. Now, hopefully they'd be a bit softer than that. They say, Antonia, I don't really see that in your future. Now, in that scenario, I might feel like going, right, well, what's the point? Actually, if we want to have good career conversations, we want to have good quality feedback, we kind of need to be easy to have conversations with. We kind of need to be easy to give feedback to. Because actually, if I then put a face on and storm out the room, next time I put some time in my manager's diary for a career conversation, irrespective of whether or not they're supposed to give me that time, they might not be quite as honest with me. They might not give me quite as much time. They might, be a little bit or so worried about how I'm going to respond to that message that maybe they don't give me 100% of the message I need to have. If I give somebody some feedback and they argue with me on it, maybe next time they ask me for feedback, I think, well, there's something I could tell them to improve just a little bit, but it's not worth the hassle. Actually, they're doing fine. They're doing okay. They could be amazing, but do you know what? I'm not going to risk it. They're doing okay. I'm just going to leave that there. I'm not going to risk the argument. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second anybody on this call is starting arguments when they're being given feedback, but it's just remembering when we're having these career conversations, it might not be great news. It might not be news in the moment that you really, really wanted to hear. It's still good for you to know. And sometimes we just need to work on our poker face. And if, let's say, somebody does give you a message that isn't brilliant, that isn't what you wanted to hear, it's absolutely fine to say, thank you so much. And it's important to say thank you so much. I'm going to take that away. If I've got any questions, I might come back to you. And that's fine. This also goes, my last little piece of advice before we open up the Q&A is, it might be that in these sort of career conversations, you're given what feels like a brilliant piece of advice in the moment. Let's say, I'm going to pick a really vague word. I'm going to say, let's say your manager says you need to be more confident. And you go, yeah, actually, do you know what? I probably do need to be a bit more confident. Right. And so you go back to your desk. And a couple of days later, you're thinking, but confident how? Confident in what way? Confident in meetings? Confident over email? Confident internally? Confident with clients? Does that just mean speaking louder? Does that mean speaking more? Does it mean more assertive? what do we really mean by? And I've spoken to a lot of people who said they've been given, you know, vague feedback that felt useful in the minute, and then afterwards they're kind of going, don't really know what to do with it. If that is you in the moment, it's absolutely fine to go back to your manager and say, thank you so much for our conversation last week. I've just been reflecting on that word confident. And I'm just really keen to know, like, what is it that you want me to be doing more of? What is it you really want to see from me that you're not seeing right now? So just drill down a little bit, because sometimes you might be given some feedback that actually you kind of agree with, but maybe you don't understand from that word what they intended. So where you can break things down and be really clear that you're on the same page in terms of what the behaviors are, what the actions are associated to those words, then that's what's going to give you what you need to make those changes to help you get where you want to go when it comes to your career ambitions and when it comes to those goals. Okay, so that kind of brings us neatly to the end of the, I suppose, the talking bit of the session. We've spoken a bit about kind of moving from that passenger seat to the driving seat of your career. We've spoken about really having a solid understanding of what your goals are, where you're trying to get to, and the fact we need to have that before we jump into our career conversations. We've gone through a couple of little tips for having effective career conversations, and then we've spoken about the power of language and those tiny little tweaks that we can make. Just 4 top tips. There could be a lot more, but these, I think, the 4 really critical ones that can really make a difference to the tone and the way in which you're having those conversations. So I'm going to have a quick look at the chat and the Q&A and just see if we've got a couple of things there.
Just in case you've not seen it yet, Anthony, we do have one in the Q&A actually that I know we've talked about kind of that relationship within a business, but someone actually asks, what if you want to be running your own business? How did you shift from, or how would you, or how did you shift from being employed to now running your own company? Any tips on whether you would need to do anything differently there or should?
Yeah. Well, so the first important thing I need to say is I don't run my own company. I work for Empowered Development. We are a team of 12 individuals working across a range of different organizations. So the first thing I need to say is actually not my company. At the same time, there is a lot of the advice is similar. I still need to know, and interestingly, I actually had a conversation just this week with somebody in a training course, and we're doing introductions. And they literally said in that session, actually, I'm looking at setting up my own organization. That's my next step after the role that I'm in right now. So in terms of what the advice is, actually a lot of it is quite similar. When it comes to setting up your own organization, we can't do that in a vacuum. I can't just set up my own organization with no one around me. I need to be communicating that vision often, regularly, to the right people. At the point at which I'm setting up, I actually need to have a lot of supporters already there. Like very few businesses are launched into a saturated market that no one's ever heard of. So if it's you and you're looking at setting up your own business, you need to be telling everybody about that vision. You need to know that you've got that support, that kind of basic, that platform, which then is going to give you something to build on. So actually, in terms of being shifting from employed to running your own company, firstly, the commercial points are all exactly the same. I need to fully appreciate what that commercial situation looks like, and where what I'm offering fits into that commercial, what commercial gap that opportunity fits into. I need to be telling a lot of people about it. I need to make sure that I'm recruiting the people around me for it. I need to be very open to advice. There's going to be a lot of people helping and supporting and there to bounce ideas around. Not having done it myself, but speaking to a lot of people who have done it, I think the biggest shift when it comes to leaving an organization and setting up as an independent is, even if you're working in an organization, maybe in a very independent role, maybe actually I'm a team of one, but people think actually I'll be working for myself. Often actually that means working by yourself. And we do need the networks around us. We do need our support networks, even if it's just people on a day-to-day basis, hearing our complaints or our moans, to our colleagues about people we're working with, or whatever that might be, frustrations. We need to have a little bit of an outlet, and we also need our supporters around us. So I'd say my number one tip is communicate the vision, have it really clear, recruit a lot of people around you to help you with those first few steps, particularly because actually, as I said, working for yourself sometimes also means working by yourself, which without that can be a bit of a lonely experience.
Fantastic, thank you. And the person who's posted that question, if you've got any follow-up, feel free to drop it back in that. You can continue posting on your question. We've had another one come in while I see if there's any follow-up come in, and again asks, how have you found that these conversations can change or how an approach may be different, say one of the parties is neurodivergent. Any thoughts on that at all?
I think when it comes to, firstly, it's really important if you are neurodiverse to have had that conversation with your manager, for them to understand that, to be kind of, for you to have experience, I suppose, of kind of adapting your approach. We know that sometimes things need to be a little bit more spelled out, right? We're not going to be as potentially, depending on your type of neurodiversity, depending on your experience of it, depending on how it presents. We know there's a massive wide different worlds of experiences when it comes to neurodiversity. So the first thing I would say is, if it's you, with the people you're speaking with, that context is important to understand. So it's important that people know that, you know, that's where you're coming from, that's your lived experience. You'd imagine if that's your manager, then they would have that understanding and that appreciation. The next thing I'd say is, particularly where you're talking about translating advice into actions, if anything, is even more important, because sometimes these things can sound a little bit subtle. I've just said, be more confident. That means, even for people who aren't neurodiverse in any way, that can mean a million different things to a million different people. But you can see how two people might understand completely different things from those words. So I'd say even more important, just to kind of drill down a little bit and say, yes, but what does that mean in terms of what I need to do more of? What does that mean in terms of what I need to do less of? So I'd say, actually, in terms of that advice specifically, I'd say it's more important to be more specific if you can. And the same thing goes for managers. Managing people who maybe aren't, we know that we might not necessarily see the world exactly the same way. The other thing I would say is, actually, most of your organizations are going to have some fantastic HR support, some fantastic employee assistance programs. If, let's say, I'm having want to rehearse a conversation, or there's somebody I'm going to be speaking with who does have a particular neurodiversity, and I want to speak to somebody who has expertise specifically in that, to understand that perspective, to understand how I can best position stuff. Actually, again, it's difficult to give general advice on such a broad thing, but I would try and seek out that more specific advice where I can. Most organizations have brilliant and simultaneously hugely underused employee assistance programs. So speak to your HR team, otherwise that might be a really useful starting point.
Fantastic, thank you for that. And again, if there's any follow-up questions to that, please just continue on that thread. Another one that we've got for you, we've still got time, just keeping our time, is, what if your focus on work in the last year was low due to bad health, but you're in a better place now with a renewed focus, but that your head of department only has that impression of you, and your manager, who was a good support, didn't really delegate much to give you more, sorry, it's just a notification coming right in the middle of that, give you more opportunity, and has now also retired? How would you ensure that you advocate for yourself in progressing your career? That's a really good question, because it probably echo quite a few lived experiences here, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can broaden that out to say, somebody who's been, for whatever reason, maybe has had to take a sidestep or had to manage their career in a slightly different way. So I know here there's a specific question around poor health, but there's lots of reasons why people sometimes need to manage their career in a very specific way. Maybe they've got elder care, maybe they've got childcare, maybe there've been other things happening which have had to take a priority over their careers for a period of time. The first thing is really important to say is that we have to have those conversations with our if anything, this is the one of the most important times for us to have that conversation with our managers. Here especially, you can really hear that I kind of feel almost there's nothing I can do. I feel powerless. I feel like there's a perception of me which is guiding the decisions made about me, about my career. So we think about that circle of control, right? Circle of influence and no control. We're almost putting ourselves in that little box of no control. There's always something that you can do. So I would absolutely strongly recommend having that conversation, acknowledging that there has been a period during which you have not been able to do these things for whatever reason that might be, and renewing your focus, explaining what is it that you are looking for, explaining what your strengths are, explaining what you want to do. Again, it's not enough to say, I'm ready for more, give me more what? And particularly if you've had poor health, or if I'm returning after, I think maternity leave is always a really good example of this. You might have people whose hearts are in the right place. They don't want to overload this particular person. But what that might end up looking like is withholding work, which this person could and wants to do. So it's very important that we can set those parameters, that we are asking for that work. We are making it very clear that this is work that we want. Now, Again, I don't know your specific situation. If you're in a phased return, what I'd probably recommend doing is kind of asking for those additional responsibilities and putting in very regular catch-ups, both so that you can manage how much challenge is that, and you kind of feel the four corners of your abilities and what you're able to do. But also, if you think about it from the other perspective, so that person has full confidence that you're on top of it, you're nailing it, you're doing a brilliant job. So actually, if there's radio silence, you can also imagine if you reverse the situation, you might be a little bit worried. I've given this person this task. The last thing I want is for them to be struggling with it, for them not to be enjoying themselves, for it might maybe even affecting their health. And the last thing I would want is to be accountable or responsible for that. But actually, if that person's checking with me regularly, going, doing really well, nailing it, everything's going really well, here's that thing you needed from me, that's going to give me more confidence that actually this person has got it. They are back where they wanted to be, and it's not, they're not just telling me that they've got this, that the capacity is increased from here to here, but actually I'm being shown that as well. So I'd say really important to have that career conversation, particularly when we talk about ambition. I've spoken to a lot of people over the years who, it's going to sound weird, but they assumed their managers knew they were ambitious. Oh, I just assumed they knew I was ambitious. I assumed they knew that I wanted to progress. And then they've had that conversation, and because of whatever this event might have been, their managers didn't realize. So I'd say really important to have that conversation, really important to express that ambition, to express where you want to be, to explicitly ask for those additional responsibilities. And if you think there's any risk that somebody might be withholding things, for a nice reason, but ultimately it's going to affect my career prospects, it is just giving them those regular updates so they are perfectly comfortable that they are not having a negative impact by giving me that work that I'm asking for.
So thank you. And again, any follow-up questions, but I hope that was useful. Just mindful of time, we've got time for this one final question, I hope. And again, I suppose looking at it from a different angle, but if people around me treat me more junior or less competent due to my age, how can I change that so it doesn't outshine the work I am doing?
Mm-hmm. This, I suppose, comes down to, and it's a phrase that some people love and some people hate, but it comes down to a phrase called personal brand. Right, so I need to think about, well, how is it that I want people to see me? Now, what we have here is somebody thinking, well, I don't want to be seen as junior, but it's really hard to aim for a negative. I can't aim for not junior. So I need to think about, well, what am I going to put in that space instead? You're probably not going to put older. You're probably not going to put more senior. But what is that word that I want to be aiming for? Maybe it's to be a credible expert. So then we need to ask ourselves, right, well, if I want to be seen as a credible expert, what does a credible expert do? What does that look like in meetings? What does that look like in terms of behavior in the office? What does that look like in terms of volunteering for senior projects? Actually, depending on the role you're in, the organization you're in, your team, what does that look like in terms of maybe getting rid of some of the tasks you've done? Maybe actually I'm holding on to some junior tasks that I could be giving to the new most junior member of the team. Maybe I've been holding on to these things which are quite junior tasks because it's helpful, but maybe I don't need to be doing them anymore. So my advice to you would be to think, rather than thinking about how you don't want to be seen, think about how you do want to be seen, and then work out what are those behaviors? What does that look like? What do I need to be doing a little bit differently in order to be seen the way that I want to be seen? The last thing I might do is you might even recruit somebody to help you with that. You might even say to your manager or to a mentor, hey, actually, I'm conscious that I've been doing this a few years now. I really want to make sure that I am projecting this seniority and this competence and this experience. And I feel like maybe I'm not hitting that at the moment. What else could I be doing? So that's the last thing, that a little piece of advice, just to kind of give yourself something to aim for and potentially get some support and help with it as well.
Fantastic. I think that's all of our questions. Yeah, just having another quick look. Obviously, we are out of time now, so we'll wrap up. I love that sort of powerful language about instead of requesting feedback, looking for advice, because like I said, people love to share advice. So I think use it as sparingly or as willingly and as much as you want. I think is how I would say take that forward. And I thank you everybody for your time today, especially to our members for coming along and listening, and again obviously Empower Development for their time, and particularly Antonia for making use of this hour. And I can just echoing the comments that are coming through from Palm, been very useful and certainly opened I think, opened another way for us to continue having these conversations. So I wish everyone good luck with these conversations as well. And we've got some great advice from Antonia to take forward. And I can see that she's got her details there as well if anyone wants to reach out to her directly. Otherwise, thank you again, everybody, and good luck with your conversations. We've got some great advice from Antonia now. Thank you.